Hey guys, welcome to the Full Spectrum Warriors podcast. My name is Rich Graham, and today I'll be joined by Nick Kush. Nick has an extensive background in Naval Special Warfare, starting as a SWCC operator, transitioning over to EOD technician, who was attached to the SEAL teams. This episode is sponsored by Grunt Style, the all-American Patriot apparel brand. All right, guys, welcome to the Full Spectrum Warriors podcast. Today, I'm sitting down with Nick Kush, who has an extensive background in Naval Special Warfare and some really interesting stories, really cool, different perspectives. He's done some amazing, adventurous things, doing 7-continent skydives in 7 days. Is that right?
You got it, man.
That's so cool. So we're going to get into a lot of really great topics today. And Nick, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, man, thanks a lot. It's good to see you again, Rich.
Yeah.
Whenever I come out here, I feel like it's always been too long.
Yeah.
So I need to come out here more often with you, man. So thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So it's pretty cool. Nick and I were talking right before we started the recording here about the ranch that we live on, where we headquarter Full Spectrum Warrior out here. It was actually really big. It's part of a bigger ranch that has a private airfield. And I didn't realize this when I was purchasing the property, that there's a lot of guys who used to skydive out here. There was a big skydiving community, and then there's a lot of dudes from the spec warfare community that still jump into the ranch. And it was kind of like a funny surprise I'm out here working on the ranch one day, and I see these dudes floating in on parachute, and I'm like, what? And I started talking to the neighbor about it, and he's like, yeah, I usually don't, tell people when the Special Forces guys are jumping into the ranch, just for OPSEC stuff. But so actually Nick has been out here to the ranch well before I ever was. And you just give us a little bit on that.
Well,
that's cool.
It's like this sort of like little exclusive, at least it feels like it's like this little exclusive kind of group that you get to be part of with, a good friend of mine who lives here locally here, Ian Bobo. Their company, basically, they have a really good arrangement with Kim, who's the property owner over on the other side, that they can bring guys in and sort of do this remote kind of jump, and then it's a jump into a barbecue, and it's like this big kind of like really cool event. So I was one of the I think third group that, at least from what they told us, we was like the third group to jump in here with them back in 2011, I think. And so to full circle, move here, and then, a few years later move here, and then come out here and then see what you've got going on out here, which has just been awesome, so it's been pretty neat. It
was funny because I had no idea that all these guys in the skydiving community wanted to buy the property. Everyone wanted to move out here.
Yeah.
And when I got it and I went out and I was doing some jumps out in DeLand, and those guys found out that I was the dude who lived out here now. They're like, what? How did you get that place?
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know. It was for sale for 11 years. No one bought it, I guess it's right place, right time,
Yeah, which is really cool what you ended up turning it into, is this full, this full spectrum type of environment where you're shooting. And I mean, it's in this retreat, all the programs that you have out here, it's so fitting for sure. It's awesome.
Well, I appreciate it. Yeah. It's been fun. It's fun. It's cool. It's cool to have the guys from the community come through and just hear some old stories about things that happened out here in the past, and just cool memories and stuff.
Yeah, it's really neat. So
let's jump into your background a little bit. As I was mentioning, Nick has a very extensive background, and it's really cool. He went from SWCC boat operator to explosive ordnance disposal technician, and then on to being attached to a SEAL team and all this kind of stuff, and then went into the skydiving and parachute industry following that. So kind of in your words, run us through some of that that timeline and history of that.
Yeah, so it was 1996 is when I first left for boot camp in October of 1996. I'd already graduated high school and done a year of, after that, about a couple months of junior college. That didn't take. I grew up in Southern California, so my big thing was surfing. So I was always in the water. I barely made it through high school because I was always ditching first period to go surf, and so I was just surfing. Really kind of started that bond with with friendships, and surfing with other guys. And we were basically, it was never really into team sports. So that was kind of where that camaraderie started to build. And so in 1996, I needed a job, and the Navy was going to keep me close to the water. I didn't really know much about special programs, but I knew that I wanted to stay close to the water, and the Navy sort of offered that for me. So, so boot camp, all along to a trade school right after that. Spent some time in Washington, D.C. As a lowly E1, just doing admin stuff for the Bureau of Naval Personnel when that used to be in D.C. before it moved to Millington, Tennessee. And then I was supposed to go to a pre-commissioned brand new ship in San Diego. But I had some buddies that I, met up with that were working in another detailing shop that were all going to either EOD, dive school, buds, whatever it was. And so I found out about SWCC, and they were driving boats. That was going to keep me on the water. And so I put in a SWCC package from there, and then went to SWCC in, it would have been April of 98. And then was assigned to the West Coast, at the time, boat unit. Now it's a boat team. Mm-hmm. And then I was partnered up with SEAL Team 1 and 5 and deployed to PACOM, Guam in the summer of 99. And during that time, those types of deployments, if anybody remembers 1990s kind of deployments, was deploy, train, get in the gym, wherever you were at, and it was just always training, doing foreign internal defense, basically FID missions with partner forces. We did stuff with the Singaporeans. Yeah, those guys that was actually a really good experience. The Singaporeans have got a top-notch facility and really, on-point special operations program out there. Stuff with the Aussies. A lot of the stuff with the Aussies came to Guam. And so that was all my first, experience and to see the full circle of that experience, that first deployment during peacetime, and seeing how that was going to go as a boat guy, as a SWCC guy going into it. Came back and then cycled back through, and then went to the Northern Arabian Gulf summer of 2000, and was deployed with SEAL Team 3. And our focus is SEAL Team 3 and SDV 1, and our focus was basically maritime interdiction operations, MEO operations. So any oil tankers coming out of Iraq, illegally smuggling oil, we would go up and do boardings and then takedowns, and then turn the ship over to basically the big fleet, and then just continue that cycle. And we were there in October of 2000 when the USS Cole was hit in Yemen, and we got spun up to go support ship security in UAE out of Jabal Ali. So there was no ships that were pulling into port that were operating in the Arabian Gulf. So we would just basically do ship security for about a month and a half while they were resupplying, refueling. And that was the only place that was safe for them to go into after the Cole got hit. And that was, wrapping up in 2000. So,
I remember that. I was actually in Navy boot camp when the Cole got hit.
Yeah.
It was really interesting too, because you talk about the time, the 90s going into the 2000s when that happened. I remember being in boot camp, and we had people who were like, all of a sudden they thought we were possibly going to go to war, and you had all these people trying to get out, and they were trying to pretend that there was, this is before you could be openly gay in the military. So you had guys like writing love letters to each other and stuff like that, trying to get kicked out.
Wow.
Yeah. Dudes trying to escape off of base. And it was interesting because the drill instructors came back, and they were just basically like, reaming us all out, yelling at everybody. And they were like, let me get a show of hands. Like, dude, you guys joined the military. Like, why are you so surprised you might be going to war? And they were like, how many people here, joined the Navy just to get money for college?
Yeah,
and it was like every freaking hand out of 99 dudes in our thing, all these hands went up, and he's like, okay, let me do this over. How many people are here not to get money for college? And it was very few hands. He's like, how many of you people are trying to go for a special warfare program? And it was basically all the same hands. Mm-hmm. But it was a big reality check for a lot of people, because that was like that first hint of like, we might not be at peacetime anymore. And then obviously shortly after that, you had 9/11.
Yeah.
But that was a big wake up call to a lot of people.
Well, yeah, because it was. I mean, I don't remember the number. The number that rings off to me is about 12 or 14 injured and killed, and I think it was 8 killed in the USS. I mean, those were but those were Navy service, men and women.
Yeah.
Just doing their duty on a ship and a small boat comes up and then, boom. So it was that vulnerability that, we had no idea. But if we look back, there are these patterns of behavior. Well, that happened, and then 11 months later, and we start to see, obviously a lot of the other activity that was going on between that and September 11th of 2001. These are all patterns of behavior and strategic strikes that they were doing collectively. So
how did you enjoy your time with the special boat teams?
Oh, I thought it was great. I mean, it was a great time. It was a great way to grow up. I had a lot of really great mentors coming through, that showed me sort of the way. A lot of older guys that had time that were, working when SBU 26 used to exist down in Panama. And then there were all these riverine guys, and the SWCC community really kind of grew up hanging their hats on the old patrol boat riverine guys from Vietnam, the brown water, black beret Navy guys. And that was like where some of the homage, they paid that homage to that. So you had a lot of these riverine guys that were great mentors for the boat, stay on the boat. It's like, your iconic movies like Apocalypse Now, those were PBR, those were, our kind of our grandfather boat guys. Now, granted, the history of boat guys goes even further back into World War II, but where we hung our hat on with that Vietnam era, those brown water Navy guys. So having that mentorship and that development in my early 20s was great. I got, smacked around quite a bit, you're early 20, 21 years old in the military and you're a part of these advanced units, it's going to happen. So,
yeah, I think SWCC is probably like one of those best kept secrets or like most underrated job in the Navy. Like they get to do a lot of really cool stuff.
Sure.
And they get, to go on really fast boats with big guns, and they get to jump and do all sorts of stuff. I don't really know if people realize how cool of a job it is.
No, it was, and it really was at the time for me. It was great. I did 3 years on the West Coast, and then eventually, in March of 2001, moved down to Puerto Rico when Roosevelt Roads was still open, at the Unit 4 that was based down there, and I loved it. I mean, it was great riding boats, and that was the thing, because it was kind of my vision of when I retired or when I got out was I was going to run some type of surf camp with boats or something like that. This was like I was going to be a maritime specialist was the idea. But heavy sea states, as you probably know, wear on the knees and wear on the back and wear on the neck. And when I started taking a long look at the longevity of some of the guys, some of my mentors and guys that I was falling under their wing, they were getting beat up. I'm like, it might be time for a change. And then, after doing a lot of the work in Central America, the Caribbean, and South America, being based out of Puerto Rico, March 2003 hits, obviously 9/11 hits. We were supposed to go to Bolivia on September 12th, 2001, and obviously that was canceled. And then March 2003 rolls around and we go storming into Iraq. It's time for me, it was time for a change. Roosevelt Roads had been bracked, or had been basically Congress had voted for it to close. And so it was either go back to the West Coast, ride coastal boats, go to Mississippi, ride riverine boats, or go to Virginia Beach and ride coastal boats, or put in my package something that I've been wanting to do and go to explosive ordnance disposal school. And that's what I did.
Okay, that kind of answers that question. I was going to ask, how did you make the decision to transition? So basically, based on what the war was doing and where you saw the future of the battlefields, you felt as if the boat teams were not the right place to tactically put you in the position you wanted to be in.
Afghanistan had kicked off, and there was, we'd heard stuff, and then we had deployed some boat guys from Puerto Rico to East Africa, and we're doing some stuff off of Kenya and things like that. But it just seemed like there was the footprint that was going on with Afghanistan. It was going to be special operations. It didn't appear, at least at the time, that it was going to be this big conventional move. And it's like, looking at Afghanistan, it's landlocked. And then when Iraq goes off, I'm looking at Iraq, and there's this small little strip of coastal work, so unless you're riverine, I just didn't feel it at the time. So I felt like I'd always wanted to go into a program that was going to get me on the ground and then also prep me for a diverse military career, nice resume when I got out, when I retired. And that was the idea.
How'd the guys you served with, how'd they react when you told them that you wanted to leave being a boat dude and go over to EOD?
They were incredibly supportive.
Really?
That's awesome. I got no one going, you shouldn't do this. Like, you should stay a boat guy. No one. Everyone's like, yeah, man, go. Yeah, if you want to go to the fight, just, don't get yourself killed. But like administratively, like the big chain of command really pleasantly surprised me. It's like when I had called the detailer, the senior chief, and let him know what I was thinking. And I remember exactly where I was in Puerto Rico at the time when I called him. His name was Mike Whirlman. And he goes, look, man, he goes, you've done 6 years and they've been good. You haven't gotten in trouble and you did some really good deployments. So if you want to go, go. And if you don't make it for whatever reason, you can come back. So it was like, okay, there was like this nice little pad. I wasn't thinking about not making it, just as anybody is, but it was really cool support to get from those guys.
That's awesome to hear. Cause I had buddies who I went to like boot camp with, and they were supposed to go to buds or whatever. And then they got injured, or during A school, they got out of shape and they didn't pass their SEAL physical fitness test to go to buds. And they wound up going to the fleet doing their original job. And when they would try to put in a package to go back, the leadership would be like, yeah, man, when you finish up your time here at this duty station, we'll put in the package and we'll sign off on it. But to get approved, like you had to be one of the best at your command and perform for that duty station to show that you're one of the elite and you deserve to have a chance to go to buds.
Yeah.
And then you'd go to the next duty station and they're supposed to sign off on it. And then they'd be like, oh, well, we don't want to give up our best guy.
So
hey,
good.
if you do 2 years here that are really good, well, and then next thing you know, 6 years goes by and no one ever lets you actually leave the fleet. Well, I guess in that case, you're not in the fleet. You're already in SOCOM.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, but I've seen a lot of guys have a really hard time
it happens
going from the fleet into
the guys feel like that you're leaving us, like we're not good enough for you kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so you want to go into this other community, perhaps because they never did, or they went and didn't make it themselves. Whatever it is, it's like there was a certain pride that they felt like you were kind of rubbing the wrong way if you wanted to leave. You don't want to be on a ship? No. Not really.
Yeah, that's interesting. And that stuff happens like
all over,
not just in the military. I mean, that stuff just happens in everyday life. I mean, I remember seeing that happen with people playing sports in high school and stuff. Like you want to try a new sport and then people like get pissed because you're like unplugging from,
my sport.
Cool. Yeah. I did 2 years of this and I want to try something else. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. I don't like you or I'm talking negative about you. I just want to try a new experience.
Yeah.
And it's funny how people take that personally.
Yeah. I can imagine Bo Jackson had to deal with that quite a bit.
I bet. Yeah. So then you transition over to EOD. How was that process?
I mean, it was, first it starts with like 2.5 months of dive school. So it was kind of interesting because this was going to be my favorite part of it because we're in the water, and I was surprised how much it weeded out, a lot of people that were in my dive school class. And a lot of people, I mean, the attrition rate wasn't that bad, but there were some people that just were not comfortable getting hit, doing pool comp and getting hits and going deep and doing a lot of the academics were hard, but that wasn't really what got people. It was the water. But I was right at home. It was kind of interesting to see when we were at dive school. When I was at dive school, everybody had to wear the traditional Navy fleet uniform, the dungarees. Well, I didn't own any. I had camis, so I got a little bit of shit from the instructors and from the other students because I was wearing. I'm not going to go and outfit and go back to dungarees. I've been in these camis for six years and I've earned these. And so it was a little bit of like, well, you can't make a Navy guy go spend money on uniforms when it's not my uniform. So that was my fight. And I never had to get into the dungarees. So
that's funny.
It was worth the fight though. It's like, okay, I'm going to do this. And one of the like the class leader said, hey man, why don't you just go? I'm like, it's not going to happen, dude. It's not going to happen. I've done deployments, guys. So you haven't. I'm not doing it. Yeah.
That's so funny.
Yeah. So then dive school, transition over to EOD school. All in all, the training was about 14 months.
So is the dive school part of the EOD pipeline, or you go through actual Navy dive school and then you go to EOD?
So you've got actual Navy dive school, which is 2 Chuck or 2 Charlie school. So it's not that. So
Okay.
this is its own EOD dive school. And
Okay.
at the time, I believe it's still the same. It's about 2.5, 3 months where you're doing open circuit and then semi-closed circuit, which, and I may be dating myself, but I'm pretty sure they're still on the Mark 16. I'm not sure what mod, but it's a semi-closed circuit system that are probably really familiar with your background, right?
Yep.
So those were the two systems that we basically trained on. And so obviously with all the dive medicine and physics and everything like that. And then once you finish, then you drive, an hour west to Eglin Air Force Base. And then that's where you class up for EOD school.
Okay.
So then they were like, hey, you're the senior guy. You're the class later. And I'm like, okay. And then they told us, they said, all of you E6s have one shot. If you fail a test, you fail the retest, you're gone because we need younger people in EOD. And that was what we're up against. So
Yeah, I get that question a lot from guys who are looking to join the military, and they're they're like 30 years old and they're thinking about going, and I'm like, you might get a waiver, but
yeah,
the process before you first deploy is going to be like nearly 2.5 years. And if you're already in your 30s and you haven't even left yet, you're showing up, you're going on your first deployment at 33 years old.
You're going to be working for somebody that's 23. You'll be working for someone that's 23 for sure.
Yeah, and in that, the Navy's looking at, or the military in general is like, how many years of work can we get out of this person? Can their body handle?
Right.
And you're already like, maybe today you're good, but how are you going to be good in 5 or 10 years from now? Because they're looking for longevity.
Yeah.
And but I've seen some dudes go through, buds, who are like 30, but I remember when they were doing that, it seemed like they were grandfathers.
Yeah.
They seemed so old.
Look at us now.
Yeah, I know. It's crazy. It's crazy. So coming through EOD and coming from the SWCC background, trying EOD, what were some of the main differences that you saw, like, between working for the two different jobs? Or
it seemed like it was more, I mean, it was the basic training for, the selection process was, one was much more physical and one was much more academic. Like, I mean, EOD school, while there was some physical aspects of it, it was like, we never lost anybody because of pull-ups. If you passed basically the screening test, we had to do it, I think, once every couple of weeks. And there was beat downs here and there, but, out of just sheer, that's just principle, right? But the academics was where it was challenging, right? And I wasn't the greatest student in high school, so this was going to be a whole new, monster for me to wrestle. But then the community differences, we went through the way that, like, your orders worked out was, if you were whatever top of the class, they basically brought out the set of orders. You had this many slots to the West Coast where everybody wanted to go, this many slots here, there, and there. And it broke out like top of the class, got their picks, et cetera, et cetera. And so I ended up on the West Coast is where I was wanting to go. And that was Explosive Ordnance Disposal Mobile Unit 3 out of Coronado. And so moving over there, I got treated just like a new guy. So it was, I'd already, done, a few deployments and a lot of experience and, deployed with, East and West Coast SEAL teams. And here I was, a brand new guy. And it was a really good experience because while the academics in EOD school did prep you for a lot of, like, the baseline fundamentals, and like the academics were basically just your basics. And then once you get to the mobile unit, going through a workup and a train up, and then getting a specific training within your detachment or your platoon that you were assigned to within the EOD command, that's where it got into the nitty gritty. And that's where it was actually really challenging. They put us through because we were assigned already to a SEAL team, but the SEAL team was still forming up. We were doing our training before then. We'd have to go on to do the training with the SEAL platoon. So they were training us in aspects of, bomb suit stuff, robot stuff, and then, basically like assault stuff. It was all different. It was just this full spectrum, this jack of all trades, kind of master of none sort of thing that we had to basically try to figure out and navigate as a new guy, where before I had to know the engine, the radar, the weapon system. And it was really, I don't want to say it's easy, but I adopted and was able to pick up those responsibilities with a little bit more of a simplistic mindset. This was very analytical and technical. And so then I sort of developed this very calculated approach to things. And I started to really take a long look at things and what I did, how I did it, and where it would follow suit, because I was kind of trying to think down the road of what this looked like for me in 10 years. But I was still just overwhelmed with the amount of information and the technical expertise that was expected of an early, EOD operator right out of school assigned to a very hard and fast team, because a lot of those guys had already had a lot of deployments to Bosnia. Some had been to Iraq already. And so there's like this old guard that was now turning over, just like it should be. These guys with more experience, turning all this stuff over and doing this, in-depth training so that we will pass all of our evaluations and then get pushed out on to our respective SEAL team and then deploy. So
how was that showing up to the SEAL team as an EOD guy?
It was awesome. I walked in, it was August of 2005. We were finished with our EOD training and there was 8 of us at the time. And they said, hey, SEAL Team 3 is one of the task units is out at Nyland doing land warfare. And we're all 8 of us are in the office and like, who wants to go? And I was like, I raised my hand. I'm like, I do, of everybody, like these guys had like, other personal stuff that they were working on. I was like, I'll go. So I drive out to Nyland and I show up into the building there and I walk in and it's a ghost town. I'm in, camis uniform, right? And this guy starts walking down the hall and I see him and I was like, holy shit. I'm like, I know that guy. And he walks up and he's like, hey, you are an EOD guy? And I go, yeah. And he's like, you're in Charlie Platoon. I'm like, okay. It was Tony Efrati, who I had deployed with as a boat guy in 1999 to Guam. So this is like funny. 6 years ago. He was just like an E6, trigger puller. Now he was a platoon chief of Charlie Platoon at SEAL Team 3 and task unit, the infamous task unit Bruiser under Jocko Willink and Leif Babin. So that was how that started. And it was, they had already been there a week and we're going through like a lot of their immediate action drills or IADs and a lot of their footwork and movements for breaking contact. And we go out and they take me out for the first time and I'm out there and I'm just sort of like doing walkthroughs with them. And then we go out to do live fire and Tony comes up to me and he goes, Nick, he goes, just go dry on this one. Everybody else is going to be shooting, but just go dry. I'm like, okay. He goes, it's not that we don't trust you. It's just that we don't trust you. I'm like, good, got it. So I remember going through, it was a good couple IADs before Tony gave me the green light and I'm going through the motions and one of the training cadre come up to me and tapped me on the shoulder like, why aren't you shooting? And I was like, they told me not to. Like, okay, good to go, And so just getting through and breaking the ice with the guys, that was really what it came down to, is figuring out that they got to trust you in a firefight in the house, doing CQC, and they got to trust you at the bar. So that's kind of where I was able to capture that it helped with my SWCC background as a boat guy deploying with like this mindset before. It was it came naturally for me to adopt and to start to create and form the framework that would later become one of the most significant parts of my life, is that brotherhood with those guys, like that is still even exists today. So
how did you navigate doing that without taking offense? I know there's a lot of people who basically try to take their previous credibility, and even if they're rolling over into something that's new, they basically, hold on to that as if like, you need to respect me because I've done this, this, and this. How did you navigate, essentially humbling yourself to go into that new job, that new arena?
Oh, it was tough. It was not without its challenges for sure. But I knew my role. Mm-hmm. I knew my job. I was nervous going through obviously all the blocks of training, and then we were 7-8 months from deploying, so we would get really good at my job and then good at supporting them by showing that I can do parts of their job as well. So we've done land warfare. I went to the mobility block, which is it's just driving trucks. There's not a whole lot of EOD work, but I want to understand how they're doing immediate action drills and breaking contact in vehicles. So I know it. If I'm ever driving or if I'm ever in the turret, I can do that. And then it turned into going to the CQC block and then the Mount block, or the urban combat block that was out at Fort Knox. And that was where the switches started to click. Was I knew my role. I could turn it on and be an assaulter, or I could like flip the switch and then be an EOD guy and sling my weapon and take a knee and basically do what I have to do with unexploded ordnance and a landmine or improvised explosive device or whatever it was. But that was key for me to be able to find my role where I could support them. And then what that really turned into was it reciprocated, where then they would support me as well.
Yeah.
So that was really important because it was that trust. If I could do 4-man room entries, 2-man room entries, at the time we were running hall boss and like be able to actually find myself on point, and those guys not at the beginning it was like, all right, Kush, I got this, and they would bump me out, but then it started to develop to where there was some trust developed, and then obviously going out and drinking with them out of Memphis helps.
Yeah.
If you can, you can be a good, if you can drink beers with the guys and not be sloppy and be a good dude, that helps build trust.
Yeah, I was always impressed by we had an EOD guy attached with us at 10, and I just remember like talking to him and be like, damn, dude, you have a lot of shit to do. And he's like, yeah. I was like, you're here with us doing all of our workup. Like, when are you going to get a chance to practice like your stuff?
Right.
And every now and then he would leave the team and he'd go back and basically do some of his own continuing education. Maybe if we had like a down week in between trips or whatever, and it was like a gear week for us to like prep our equipment and stuff, he might jump back over and do whatever he was doing on his end. But yeah, man, it was wild to think of how much shit we had to learn, and then he had to like double on that. With all the EOD stuff, which I always found pretty impressive.
I mean, the expectation was never like, hey, we need you to be able to do X, Y, and Z, just like the newer guys or the one deployment team guys, but you wanted to. You wanted to be able to I want you to trust me because I'm gonna be on the assault as well. Like I want to be on the force list going out. You know? Not just because it's my own, like I want to be on an assault, but my job is to clear this impedance to our assault and to keep my bros alive. So in order for me to be successful at what I'm a specialty in, I've got to prove to you that I am not a liability, that I can carry my weight, that I can contribute effectively to the battlefield. And that was the idea.
I kind of screwed that up with my EOD guy. I didn't get his trust because we got issued these stun guns at the team. and I was like, dude, this thing is awesome. And I remember we had this thing for like a week right before we broke for like a Christmas leave. And I brought this thing back with me to New Jersey. And all of my friends at the time were like in college. And we went to like this party that was going on, and I had it in my truck, and I forget how it came up in the conversation, but however it did, I wound up going out to the truck and getting the stun gun and bringing it in, and we had like all these drunk people, daring each other to take a hit from the stun. It wasn't a taser where you shot the prongs; it was just a stun gun. Yeah. And next thing you know, this thing turns into, I got a line of, like, one person did it on the arm, then someone's like, okay, do it on my neck, then some dude's like, do it on my nipple, and then next thing you know, like, everyone who's drunk at the party wants to get a chance to get hit with the stun gun, so I got a line down the hallway, and I'm just zapping everyone in the party, and somehow this got back to the command, and they called it in over the loudspeaker, and I got my stun gun taken away, and they announced it over the speaker in the morning that no one was to give me a stun gun and that I lost my privileges and this and that. So then I was like, I remember we were on a trip and we had gone through like an improvised demolition course, and we learned a bunch of really cool stuff. And then I was talking to my EOD guy. I'm like, so if you know how to take things apart, you know how to build them. If we reverse engineer it, like just by common. And he's like, yeah, to an extent. And I'm like, so what are your thoughts on? And I started coming up with, he's like, dude, after the shit you pulled with the stun gun, I'm not teaching you anything. He's like, I am not getting roped into your bullshit. You know what I mean? Like next thing you know, you're going to be, because I was like talking about taking remote control cars and like putting stuff in, if we had a remote control car and it's got like a horn or flashing lights, theoretically, we should be able to drive the car and put some stuff in and do this. He's like, dude, I'm not showing you how to do that. We're not doing it. He's like, I'm not going down with you. But it was funny.
Both of your guys' names over the loudspeaker next time.
Yeah. But what did you find was the biggest challenge for you at the command, regardless of which one? I know in my book that I'm writing right now, I'm at the final stages of it. But one of the things that I write about in the book was a lot of us see people who reach super high levels of performance or it could be in sports, it could be in the military, it could be politics, whatever it is. But a lot of times behind the scenes, there's certain things that there's shortcomings or there's a blind spot in our overall progression, or there's challenges that we have to deal with that, and a lot of times they have nothing to do with the actual job. You know what I mean? And what did you find through your career was one of those spots that you really had a big challenge that you had to navigate and deal with and overcome?
Well, I had it early on, and it's funny, not until like I would say recently, like post-retirement, have I really kind of wrapped my head around resolving it, is that I had a tendency to be a people pleaser. And so, the balance, there was this contrast between where I wanted to be and what I wanted to do. And then also where I wanted to be was obviously with the SEAL platoon, working, getting ready for deployment, going on deployment and being effective on deployment and being successful on deployment. I saw that as that was my assigned mission that the EOD moment had given me. Now, the contrast to that was some of the EOD leadership not within my, EOD specific detachment or platoon that I was in, but some of the EOD leadership, and I mean some, not a whole lot, were not a fan of me cutting over and being assigned as a newer EOD guy over to a SEAL platoon. And in that sort of mission set, they wanted me to do IED response or
get more experience,
do mine countermeasures, riding a ship, diversify my EOD career is what they wanted. And it was hard to like kind of say what you needed to say and be, and appease sort of the enlisted and some of the officer leadership at your parent command. It's like, hey man, this is how I looked at it. There's a war, and I've got this opportunity to be effective with the war fighter. Like that makes sense to me. And so that was kind of tough to be able to find that balance between being assigned with the SEAL platoon and the SEAL team leadership, and then the EOD platoon and EOD leadership was kind of tough. It was sort of, I'd get comments like, oh, you're just going to go off, like, why didn't you go to BUDS or something like that, since this is all you want to do? And it's like, that never crossed my mind. My mindset was, this is my job and this is what I want to do. And this is what I have to do, is build this camaraderie to where I am trusted left and right, shoulder to shoulder. Like, on the battlefield, you're not wearing insignias. We're not worried about your resume. It's like, can you contribute to the fight? And that's where I was most effective, was that I was 100% immersed in the training that those guys were going through, with them all the way as hard and as fast as I possibly could to keep up with them and to keep pace. So that way I was trusted overseas. And to me, that was just the simplest mindset for me, but it was the contrast of making sure that the EOD big command was still pleased with what I was doing. So that was kind of tough.
Do you deal with any of that outside the military?
That was some childhood stuff, it was like the people pleasing stuff. That's an insecurity built into me, but based on my relationship with my mom or something like that. My wife, who's a clinical psychologist, will help me break down at some point, So that's where that I think came from. Wanted to be respected by everybody. And then, obviously as I got older, it's like, it either is or is not.
Yeah, I've found myself falling into that in a sense too. And I think for someone who's like a high performer like we are, I find myself a lot of times where people are constantly asking me to get involved in things or to help with things. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I can do that. You know what I mean? Yeah. And it's like, I've literally had so today's January 1st, right? And people last night, everyone's talking about New Year's resolutions and all that stuff. A few years ago, my New Year's resolution, I was like, this is the year of saying no.
Yeah, there you go.
You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Because I'm not a yes man. I don't have a backbone, but I'd be a yes man in the fact of, if people asked me for help or wanted me to be involved in something, I'd be like, yeah, man, let's do it. Mm-hmm. And I found myself so overwhelmed, involved in so many things. Yeah. And at one point, I was previously married, and there were certain things with the relationship that were toxic in nature. But on my side of the thing, like one of the things that I did, right, that didn't help the situation was I was just going a million miles an hour and working on 20 different projects at any given time.
Right.
You know what I mean? And making myself very, very absent because I was constantly working on something and like chasing something.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
And that was one of those things where I had to go like, I got to stop doing this.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's
Like this isn't sustainable.
That's where you find that no is actually a complete sentence.
Yeah.
That's
a good point.
Yeah. And I'm still finding that today, even, with being retired for a little over just a minute over 7 years, is that, man, I still got some fight left in me, man. And so I still want to do stuff. I still want to do, live an epic life, and what I'm finding, slowly but surely, because normally it's hard and fast. And like right now, an instant, gratification is that I'm working on my family, and that to me is the investment of time. But at the same time, I still have this itch to still go do stuff. It's like I leave Saturday, I'm gone for 4 weeks working, and it's work. It's also a lot of fun, and it's important to me, and it's still, pushing the envelope and doing things that I love to do. So
how do you find yourself prioritizing family?
When I'm home, I'm home. I think I heard it on, I don't know, a clip from a podcast where he had said, he goes, when you're at work and your wife calls, you usually don't answer it, because you're immersed with work or whatever it is, you'll call her back. But when you're at home and you get a work call, hey, hang out, I have to take this. So switching that up a little bit, where like I can put work on pause and take a call from my wife.
Yeah.
I can not take this work call and be with my wife and kids, and actually be, when I'm home, is do the best I can to be home. And this like past 3 weeks that I've been home for the holidays have been honestly like really, really great. And mentally it's been awesome. It's been on point. My kids are at a great age right now where it's holidays and no school and just doing nothing or doing something. And it's great. So
that's a great point. I mean, you could be home, but you're not present.
Totally. And I'm totally guilty of that for like countless times. I mean, when I come back from this next trip, it's usually a couple days before I'm actually like, okay, I'm present. It takes me a little bit to unpack things physically and mentally. Then I'm
I think
home.
That's really hard too. I think that's one of the biggest negatives of the smartphones and the home computer is that you can never get away from, like you have to make a conscious decision, like you're saying, to get away from work.
Yeah.
Where before, like I remember back in the day, before, the mid 2000s when we didn't have smartphones yet and you didn't have cell phones. Like I remember in high school we had like pagers.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it was like, okay, you get a page and it's like someone says, and you get this number called like a beeper, right? If you're young listening to this, it's like this little thing you would wear on your waist, like you're a drug dealer. It beeps, and it's like if I wanted you to call me, I would page you, and my phone number would show up, and then when you got an opportunity, you would call me back at the number that I gave you.
Yeah.
And but prior to that, it's like you didn't really call people at home for work shit.
No.
It's like you showed up from 9 to 5, and during 9 to 5, that was the time that you worked. And now it's like, hey man, it's 8 p.m. at night, and you send someone a text. Like I'll get people who send me messages, and I know this isn't me. This happens to all of us. But like, hey dude, I sent over that email. Did you get it? You know what I mean? Or like, hey man, I saw you left me unread. Like what's up with that? And is everything cool? And it's like, yeah, man, I'm not mad or whatever, but it's freaking 10 o'clock at night. I'm sitting here watching a movie with my wife, or we're doing whatever. Like it's
that instant gratification.
Can we do this tomorrow? It's like, so now that your boss or friends or whoever has this open, unsolicited invitation, they feel like, into your home. And I'm guilty of this shit too.
Oh yeah.
I'm just saying it's just the nature of the beast is with the technology giving people access into your home all the time, 24 hours a day. it's one of those things where, it really makes it challenging to, you have to make like a conscious effort to be like, sometimes I'm just like, I just put my phone on airplane mode.
Yeah, or I leave it in the other room. But then again, when I find myself like, in 10 minutes I go and look at it, or whatever. It's like, and my kids are the age where they both have phones, now, and so I'll kind of observe the room and see, my wife on it, I'm on it, they're on it. It's like, all right, and then and credit to my wife is that she'll break out a board game. Like let's mix it up and let's play a board game. And the kids will be all get into it. They're not so, so immersed in that. And, and thankfully they're involved in sports and, and other activities. So at least it's like that is leave your phone at home kind of thing, but yeah, it's definitely, we're all guilty of it for sure. And is it going, I don't think it's really going anywhere anytime soon from our culture. I think we absolutely have to be active and proactive about airplane mode, not doing it, not going for scrolling videos or whatever it is. It's like in our algorithm. It's like, okay, let me just live in the present like it was 1996.
I might start making some changes, man.
I know.
I read the book. It was years ago when I read it. It was the 4-Hour Work Week.
I've heard of that.
And there's a lot of cool things in there. Mm-hmm. I'm in a service industry where I'm training people. So it's not like I can duplicate my training by hiring some dude in India or Pakistan to do my job for me. So there's a lot of things that weren't necessarily totally relevant to my style of business. But one of the things that I did take away from the book was the dude basically, he had a certain time of day, and it was like he only checked his email. Let's say, this isn't a direct quote from the book, but let's say Monday, Wednesday, Friday, he checked his email, and he would open his email up for 2 hours, and he just had like an auto response. So if you send him an email, you'd get an auto response that he'll check it soon and get back to you. And he's like, I got 2 hours to knock out my emails. That's my window. Yeah. And I stick to my time, and this is my allotted time. And if I'm going to go onto social media, I have, these days during the week, this is my social media time, and I'll go in. And now I'm not going to sit there just BSing, scrolling and all that stuff, because I have an allotted window to get my stuff done. Yeah. I'm coming on there to do work stuff and answer some messages, and then I'm off. Yeah. And then I don't touch it, because otherwise, you wind up getting
you're lost
in the scroll, and it's designed for that.
Oh yeah.
I watched one of those documentaries from one of the dudes who left Facebook. And he was just like, dude, we created a monster. Mm-hmm. And he was saying that they literally, the whole notification thing and the beep for a notification was mirrored off of or designed off of the slot machine.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
And they said every time the slot machine spins, it like builds you up, and then it goes ding, 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 and then like the lamp, the lights flash, and the alarms go off. Like you get a dopamine hit, and they replicated
it's
that.
Like Pavlov's dog.
And they said as soon as they implemented that was the game changer for Facebook, and then like Twitter and Instagram and all that stuff. When they implemented the notification that. And especially like, oh yeah, someone liked it, but when someone left a comment on your post, you have to see what they wrote. Right. You can't just not see what they wrote. And that's how they hooked everyone in. Yeah. You know what I mean? And so side note, because now we're like I'm talking about like psychology shit. How is it being married to a psychologist?
It's it's really good because she's a really good mom. Yeah, she's a really, really good mom. We come from different backgrounds, and where, a lot of her primal thinking is, from textbook, from her years and years, because she got her doctorate from Pepperdine, and so a lot of that is like in this clinical kind of settings. Me, it's in this like very primal caveman sort of mindset when I was raised in my 20s, being part of these different programs in the military. So it has been incredibly rewarding. I was a little I was proud and a little intimidated when we first met. And then it's been, we just like I think anybody else, I mean, we've been together coming up on, let's see, 24. So we've been together probably about coming up on 19 years. And so it's been, we've had a few, rough spells, just like I think anybody else does in any particular team. Cause that's what we kind of look at as like, we're teammates in this whole process. But she's able to really break down, things when we talk about it. She knows not to go too deep into the weeds on me. I mean, I think she has said before that she goes, I'm impressed with all the shit that I've been through, that I'm not more fucked up with mental health issues and things like that. So it's nice to hear that from a clinical psychologist.
Yeah.
Kind of like an objective perspective. But she's so on point. And she's really smart, and she looks at things very calculated, just like I do. And her moral compass is always at north, and she's always been a woman of faith, since she was a child. And so those ethics and values carry over into our family household for sure.
How does that play a role when you're in the military?
As a psychologist, or
her being a woman of faith?
I mean, it was great. When we first started dating in March of 2005, she declared that early on, right away, that this is where I'm at, and this is where she's at, and this is where she wants to lead, life and a future family with. So, but no, it was. I mean, to me it was transparent. It was part of who we were going to become. So
that's cool.
Yeah.
That's a good dynamic to have that balance there.
Well, I mean, it breeds really good values, for us. And I think that, with the kids, especially at when they were younger, but at the age, I can, speaking mostly of the present, their mindset now is that they got the good genes from mom for sure. So they're on point. Yeah.
I think that's an interesting thing that she's a psychologist and she's also a woman of faith. Mm-hmm. I know that I've spoke with a lot of people who would be like, it's either science or religion.
Oh, she's able to really partition that as much as I believe, and we've talked about it before, she would love to be able to work in the capacity as a therapist in an institution of faith. She knows, I mean, she was educated by, the school systems in California, the state school systems in California. So she knows where the line is, and she's really, really good at never crossing it,
Interesting. So. Yeah. Cause I mean, there's a lot of people who say it's got to be one or the other.
Right. Of course. Yeah.
And I personally think that you can have an understanding of psychology and it supports faith, or faith can also support psychology. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like if you just go through like the book of Proverbs and you just read all those life lessons, it's crazy because a lot of that stuff was written like 4,000 years ago. Yeah. And all these little life lessons and these little one-liner kind of rules to live by. Yeah. You're like, wow, we're pretty predictable and we're really repeatable because this is written 4,000 years ago and all this shit still applies, to the stuff we're doing today.
You would think that people don't really apply it, in some cases, but yes, it really does.
It's wild.
Yeah.
It's wild. I went through a program called Operation Restored Warrior, and it was really interesting because the dude was an Air Force veteran. He was a psychologist. He was a total atheist, or totally didn't believe in God. Have you heard of the book Wild at Heart?
No, I don't think so.
So it's a book written by a guy named John Eldridge, and he wrote this book, just basically, like one thing from it. It's a book on faith, and it's a book on men and the warrior spirit within men, and why men are called to do exciting things, and of how men want to fight for a cause and all this stuff. And one of the things he talks about is that like the current man in corporate America or whatever is a lion that's been in the cage at the zoo. And he's been in the cage so long that he's forgot he's a lion. And it's like you see the lions in the zoo and they're all like sad and they're overweight and sluggish and they're just sleeping all the time. Why? Because they don't have a purpose. They don't have anything to do.
Yeah.
They're not hunting. They're not being lions.
There's no value.
There. Yeah.
The value is that they don't experience that.
Yeah. But this dude got stuck in a blizzard in Colorado, driving through the mountain pass, like on his way into Denver, and he had to pull over into one of these like hotels, like one of those ski resort hotels on the side of the road because the storm was too bad. And while he's stuck there, this dude John Eldridge is doing one of his conferences, and he basically came in and was sitting there and just like, dude, this guy's so full of crap, and because the other dude John, who runs Operation Restored Warrior now, he's like, he's a psychologist, and he knows everything, and he's very analytical, and he's just very fact oriented, and God came to him that day and basically challenged everything that he thought he knew. And long story short, John came to Christ and wound up starting a program called Operation Restored Warrior, where they basically help take veterans and bring them it's a very interesting program they do, because it's like 50% faith. I don't want to I shouldn't be putting percentages to this, but just for the conversation's sake, it's like 50% faith and 50% psychology. And it's like guys like us, typically in that field of like special warfare, a lot of times, not everyone, but a lot of times they would put you in like a category called like a broken rescuer. And it's like, we want to go help people and save people, and we'll go do that while totally neglecting ourselves. Like, we have whatever injury or whatever thing happened to us, the way that we overcome that is by helping others. And going back to, well, why do we say yes to so many things, and why do we try to please people, and why do we try to serve people? There's a psychology behind that, but there's also like a spiritual warfare thing that's also attached to it. So it was a really interesting program, but I'm just kind of rambling, but it was a cool program on how they balance the sins of the world and how we've been attacked emotionally and spiritually, and how we respond to that psychologically, and how through faith and through the understanding of the spiritual warfare, we can come back and kind of gain that ground back in our life.
Yeah.
But that was one of the first times I really experienced someone who is having that balance between the faith and the psychology. And it was really, really powerful program.
Yeah.
And the way that they communicate with people, you're like, oh, wow, this makes sense. You know what I mean? And it's just cool to hear that your wife's kind of, be able to balance that.
And if we look at what's like, who's on the feeds nowadays, is like Jordan Peterson is a perfect example of that. Because he is a, clinical psychologist, but he's also, he partitions that roughly 50-50, but it seems like he's always going back to scripture and things like that. And a lot of his books and a lot of his, his presentations that he's given, he's always, he'll do specials on exactly like, he'll just unpackage the book of Job or something like that, and things like that. And so I think there is a place for it, but like you said, initially the mindset is like separation between church and state sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of like science and faith. But she does a really good job at it. And, it's I admire it.
That's cool. Yeah. With Jordan Peterson, I don't know if his old stuff from like 5 years ago, if he was doing more of faith talks, but maybe he wasn't doing it because he was still working with the universities.
At the university, yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Because I know with the full spectrum warrior philosophy part of our program, the faith part, when I'm going and speaking to police departments and fire departments, first responders or banks and whatnot, like it really depends on who we're talking to, but a lot of times they want you to leave that part out.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
If I'm working with a sheriff's department, I can sometimes get around that and actually bring that part of the conversation into it, because the sheriff's departments have a little bit more flexibility. But yeah, it's wild. Like if we're talking to like a police department for like a city and stuff like that. When we go into like the mindset part of it, like you got to leave that stuff at the door. You know,
understandable.
They don't want it mixed in there.
Yeah, understandable.
So, anything more so, or anything stands out from the time at the teams with the EOD that you want to talk on?
Yeah, I mean, that was that building up into the workup, and then going on that first deployment to Iraq in April of 2006. We were kind of spun up to do basically security detail. I think in January was what our tasking was, and we had heard about personal security detail, and it's like the not sexy kind of work it was going to be, and it's like, okay, that's what it is. And then February, March, we had basically a month and a half off. I found myself going to military free fall, during that time. So it was sort of like that pre-deployment leave. I was able to get a seat in to go to military free fall. So that's where that sort of egg got cracked for me. And then on the tarmac, getting ready to deploy to Iraq, we found out that we were not going to be doing personal security detail, that we were actually going out west Al Anbar into Ramadi. And then people started, had a few write-ups on what, Yahoo News on what was going on in Ramadi, Iraq, and how bad it was. And so that was kind of where we had found out, the pre-deployment site survey team was already there doing left seat, right seat with, I think it was SEAL Team 2, I think that we were relieving, I think, in Ramadi, I believe it was, because a long time ago. And so got there, and immediately it turned into kinetic operations. I mean, it was just like raid after raid after raid, and then sniper overwatch positions, and basically just getting into firefight after firefight in that neighborhood. And that was that took a toll. A good friend of mine, DF, who I did my first deployment with as a boat guy in Guam in '99, and then my last deployment to Afghanistan in 2014, just kind of lined up that way. He was a new guy in '99, and then he was a platoon chief in 14. And he had said, when we were in Afghanistan in 2014, he had said that war is physically and mentally taxing, and it's competition based. And so that really kind of felt, what it was. That grind was, okay, out for a couple days, in for a couple days, out for a couple days, in for a couple days. Was that mental, physical, and then it was competition based. It's like it was us against them. And then obviously trying to do like the big, counterinsurgency, the coin effort that was getting put out during that time. And like what we really were focused on is the big picture was to train the Iraqi army, the Iraqi Jundis, to take over and police their own neighborhoods in their own country, because we're not going to stay here forever. And that was easily our mindset. But we also wanted, to get some experience. And basically we went through all this training, and you're at the show. I mean, we wanted to do assaults, and we wanted to get in firefights, and we were pretty successful at it.
Did you find yourself having to tap into your EOD job?
Here and there. I mean, I was, to be brutally honest, I was scared. I wasn't so much scared of firefights. Firefights are like when you get shot at, you just shoot back, and you just kind of go through your immediate action drills, break contact, whatever it was. But it was the part that always haunted me on every deployment and every operation I was on was if I was going to come across something that I was going to basically put hands on and prosecute some type of explosive device. And I was okay if I got myself like fucked up, but I was concerned if I was going to get someone else hurt or someone else killed of my team. And so that was always the thing. It studied so much about what the atmospherics were and what the TTPs or the tactics and techniques and procedures that the enemy was doing, because it was a chess game. They would develop something, we would counter it, and they would counter that, and it was just back and forth. So I was really good at, I felt like I was really good if I could recognize something, how it functioned, what it was designed to do, where's the target, what they were thinking when they built it and set it up. And so, came across, surprisingly enough, not all that much on that first deployment in 2006, a little bit more in 2008, and then a little bit more in Afghanistan. But this switch was like always ready. The first call I got, I think it was on our first or second assault. The first call I got was, over the radio, EOD up. And, you get that in training, and it's like, okay, one of my EOD leadership set something up for me to work on with the platoon. Cool. But this was like a EOD up, and I'm the only EOD guy on target. And so I go running, where it's at, and they're like pointing, throw, a couple chem lights at it or whatever. And I'm like, what do you got? He's like, I don't know. It's under there. It's under the stairs. I look under the stairs, and it was a weird place for it, but it was a ceiling fan. I'm like, it's a ceiling fan. And he's like, yeah, I don't know. It just is weird. So I'm like, well, hey, better to call me and not need me than, not call me. I'm like, whoops. So that one really got me going, where it's like, okay, this is going to be the norm, because you've been over there. It's like, people living, it's hard to make sense of it. I mean, after time you start to understand, and it does start to make sense. So irregularities in our own home, it's not quite the same. You start to understand their regularities, and then irregularities will stand out a little bit more. But that was like, stuff like that was like where it got me really like, okay, now I got nervous. Getting shot at or shooting back or throwing grenades or whatever, not a big deal. That was almost like easy for me, but it was, I'm going to be put into a situation where I've got to choose whether or not to prosecute this to get it done, so that way nobody else gets killed. But if I was going to make a mistake, just don't get anybody else killed. And then that then segued into how I kind of packaged training for EOD guys that were assigned to SEAL platoons later, so to be able to pass down this experience and this information that I was able to sort of process, and the way I processed it, not to say you have to do it this way, but this is just my lessons learned, and this mindset that I adopted, was keep them safe, keep them alive, so keep them working.
Yeah. And I would imagine that it's got to be super stressful, because the way that the explosives are being hidden are just so.
They got really good at it.
Yeah, there's just so many, and it's just like whatever your imagination could come up with.
Yeah, that's what we would tell people. It's like, if you can imagine it, they're already ahead of you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
super stressful. Mm-hmm. Were you guys using dogs at the time? Not yet?
Not in 2006, no, and a little bit more in 2008 we were, but not on the regular. I mean, the type of work that we were doing in 2008 really wasn't targeted assaults. We were basically doing Overwatch stuff for like 10th Mountain or some of the Marines, basically doing big time daytime clearances. So we'd go in 24, 48, 72 hours and just basically camp out with an Overwatch team, giving them security. So.
This is totally on like a side thought, but what's your take on all the drones now being outfitted with explosives that we're seeing in like Russia and Ukraine, like back and forth?
It's really interesting, and it's
because ISIS was doing that, and now you're seeing it play out all over the place.
Well, one of my buddies was doing it. He was in 2008. He was my officer in charge of my EOD platoon. So he was an EOD officer and got out and started his own company. And the drones he was designing, or they were setting up. They were more outfitting already developed drones. It would be to then countercharge an IED. So if there's an IED out, instead of driving down robot or a guy, you basically fly a drone over and drop a charge to countercharge it and basically detonate it.
Instead of like driving the robot out there and
correct. Now you're just like, the drone goes over, cool, there it is, and then drops it, and then or basically shoots it from above to disrupt it, or so that was kind of the first of its kind that I had seen. And then now it's obviously developed into, we've been using, like different types of, drones and like for years. I mean, I think, we had them in 2008. They were different. We still call them drones, but they're not like the drones that we kind of think of, like the four-bladed helicopter kind of drones. But that's tough, because that's now taking the battlefield and kind of going from, two-dimensional. While you go into an urban, it's a little bit more three-dimensional, but now you're dealing with really like omnidirectional type of threats. And that's something really new. In my opinion, what has to be done is got to be used with like, it's got to be a special operations and asymmetric warfare. It's got to be at night. It's got to be silent. It has to be stealthy. It has to use night vision and all these things to their advantage. The best you can.
And now these new drones have thermal cameras on them.
Yeah.
So even with that, you're getting like thermal imagery. So you watch these dudes trying to hide, and it's just like, it's sad to watch. You know what I mean? It's just brutal.
But even in 2006, we had countermeasures, for radio frequency and, our RC controlled IEDs. I mean, it was 18 years ago. So just like in the rudimentary kind of form, like I was talking about, it's a chess game. They develop something, we counter it. They develop something, we counter it. It basically goes back and forth. So if they've got drones with night vision and thermal capability, I guarantee, or at least there should be someone designing or innovating, if they haven't already, is counter measures for that, whether they be electronic countermeasures or some type of deflecting countermeasures when a drone is spotted, to be able to, hey, now we have a cloak basically over us.
Yeah, I know that one of my buddies has a company that does security solutions, and they developed software for like stadiums and things like that. Yeah. So, and this was years ago, but like you're saying, and they basically put like some kind of radio frequency force field around, like a jammer over the stadium, so that people can't fly drones in and crash them in a sporting event or whatever. It'll if you try to fly over it, your drone will like turn around and or land it
out of the sky or something.
Which is pretty wild. But man, just watching that stuff, you're just like, dude, things are about to get wild. Yeah, because it's not even. I know they've said that the last fighter pilots have already been born.
Oh yeah,
you know what I mean. So like the Air Force is gearing up that, they're not even going to put fighter pilots in jets anymore, because the jets can do way more performance than the human body can handle the G-forces. So right now that the jet is held back by the human body. So in the future, like it's literally going to be like a sci-fi movie, probably not too far down the road, where you're literally having drone wars. Like right now you're watching a drone fly over and take out a guy, but now they're probably gonna have to develop drones to fight the drones, and all this stuff. It's just like you watch it and you're just like, dude, this is about to get really weird.
I like to be when those basically when the countermeasures start coming into play, and it's like the chess game, it'll eventually, at least the way I see it, it'll eventually work its way back to where the man with a gun in optics, it's going to come down. It'll go right back to that after the drones are focused on, doing like, okay, all we're focusing on is counter drone work and drone work. Cool. Now we can launch the operator again.
Yep. And it's going to be a process. Right now they're talking about, one of the guys who had called me up recently was like, dude, can you believe this? So apparently the Marine Corps, who started the sniper school, is now shutting down their sniper school. And the Marines are not going to be implementing snipers, apparently, or at least the Marine Corps
snipers. Like the scout sniper?
Yeah.
Wow.
Like they might have some dudes train some like advanced marksmanship, but like the traditional sniper school is going away.
Wow.
And this is something that's happened before in the past, to where they get an advance in technology. They did this a while back. I forget if it was with the Army or whatnot, but essentially they get satellite imagery and they're like, oh, we don't need snipers and scout reconnaissance guys anymore, because we can just get satellite imagery. But then it's like, crap, we stopped this program and we only can get one perspective of the target. We can't get the nuanced detail that we need and get that human judgment, on target.
Yeah.
So then they brought it back. But the same things happened with the dogs. They used to have dogs for explosive detection, and then they got the robots, and they're like, oh, we got these little robots now. We don't need dogs anymore. And then years later, they're like, crap, we shouldn't have shut down that dog program. Let's bring the dogs back. It's true,
because like it's so much more difficult and financially taxing and to shut something down and then to start it back up, as opposed to scale it down. Okay, fine, but we need to at least hold on to the framework of it. And that way, if we need to basically then throw a bunch of focus and money at it, it's easier for us to keep it going than it is to completely shut it down and start it back up from scratch.
Yeah. And you lose the knowledge base.
That's it. And then like, where are we going to get that from?
You lose that hands-on operator experience and knowledge base, and instead you're just starting it from scratch by reading a textbook.
Yeah.
And then you have to figure it out.
All that boils down to feel.
Yeah.
And it's like, you can't like, you can create that to a certain extent. You use an AI or whatever, automated systems, but to make those calls and to be able to execute those things mentally, I mean, it's if you lose it, you lose it. It's really hard to get it back. No.
So let's talk about you leaving the military and kind of pursuing the jump industry?
Yeah. So I did my last deployment in 2014. It was about a year and a half before I ended up retiring to Afghanistan. And then I was kind of like, go time. It was sort of like, am I going to stick around? I was okay with going past 20. They wanted to, I was trying to line things up so I would then get assigned to SEAL Team 7 and get paired up with them and then deploy, cycle through with them. But some EOD leadership had it their way that they didn't want me to do that. They wanted to see me get on a ship and do mine countermeasure deployment. And I was like, well, if the decision's mine, the decision's mine. I'll punch right at 20. So I ended up doing that. And the way I looked at my career was, well, I did all these great things that I really enjoyed. Instead of trying to continue to do that post 20 years of service, I'm just going to try to focus on the thing that I like the most. And it happened to be, skydiving and military freefall. And so I saw like a niche for that. I was running a program for a couple of years while I was between my Iraq and Afghanistan appointments, and got a lot of experience, got a lot of qualifications. And then, my wife wanted to move back to Florida where she's originally from. And so I said, okay, I started looking for places, and just so happens that DeLand, where I was here back in 2011, DeLand is home to some of the premier manufacturers in the industry for not only sports skydiving, but also military freefall. So I found my way into working for a company as an independent contractor, as an instructor, and just helping train. I did that for about a year, and then found my way over to Complete Parachute Solutions, doing research and development for about 4 years. And that was mostly test jumping, working with clients, our U.S. DOD clients, as well as our international allies. And then just recently, I've been over at one of the manufacturers at Performance Designs for about 2.5 years. And that's where my role as a project lead. And I do primarily the military products that we're making, new ones on solicitation for contracts, basically to develop, systems, military systems that can go faster, higher, heavier, quieter, more better, kind of, that's my focus. And then I also do instructing for some of the DOD courses. So
did you guys ever test some stuff that was just super sketchy? Yeah,
I have a great team that I work with, some smart guys and girls, and they know, and it's not me that they're concerned about. I mean, there'll be some times they're like, man, I'm kind of sorry we're going to put you through this right now, but it's very calculated. We don't want to ever see anybody just like, hey, let's hope this works kind of thing. So I'll test jump parachutes right when they get off the production floor to test them. But it's sometimes it'll be like, I'm a little sketched on this one, but I'm very calculated and put a lot of measures in place where there's safety is around every corner. Doesn't mean a hard opening is not going to hurt. So that's happened, a handful of times, but it's really well looked at by not just me, by a good couple different sets of eyes before.
Do you guys test a lot of that stuff in the tunnel, or is it usually just all jumps?
It's all jumps because it's parachutes. So it's opening characteristics, it's flight characteristics, it's how do they land, how do they fly, how do they open? Is this the type of airspeed and type of speed that we're wanting? Is this the type of glide ratio? Basically how far can it carry over ground? Is it reinforced properly for the weight that we're asking for it to be able to carry? If it opens good at 7,000 feet MSL above sea level, how does it open at 30,000 feet above sea level? So there are all these factors that really, these little nuances, these high performance kind of race car things that adjustments that go into it.
Yeah, it's wild. I talked to a few dudes who were also test jumpers, or guys who were just over at like Dev Group, and the stuff that they're jumping with the equipment, like we did an equipment jump, and it was like a rucksack, your rifle, and some maybe you had fins strapped on, or your dive gear or something like that. But the stuff that they were jumping with, it was like they were pushing a freaking small car out of the back of a freaking plane, and I'm like, you're strapped to that thing?
Yeah.
So it was really crazy to hear how far the jump technology and the capability has moved since the time I was in to now, it's really incredible.
Yeah.
What they can do. It's nuts.
Well, the development of like the systems, I would say, with the military systems, maybe arguably really started in like the late 80s. And they really wanted to really, very select units, not just everybody that has a free fall program. And so a lot of that innovation that those guys took with current sport and civilian systems, then they partnered up with the manufacturers and then helped develop their military systems, which then in turn helped develop civilian and sport systems. So a lot of these innovations were really dual pronged and were really like in unison with each other for developing increased military capability for, these types of systems, but in turn, it also helped develop the sport of skydiving and like tandem skydiving, initially was done in, I think the first one, we just went over 40 years. So 1983 is where like a lot of that tandem skydiving with Bill Booth and Ted Strong. And then the military started taking a look at it. And then because of that partnership and that arrangement, those agreements, they were able to develop even better systems together, which benefited the military, but it also benefited the skydiving community. And then now you've got like, patents and new inventions have been created and patents have been filed and all these different things have been moving forward. And so we're kind of like broaching the top of the pyramid, you almost think, but as materials are getting better and hardware is getting better, lighter, maybe not metallic, for different reasons. And so there's a lot of these different innovations that are still even squeezing onto this plateau that we're on. So it's pretty interesting and pretty remarkable to be just a small part of it. So.
How was the progression of the skydiving, the air capability, as it compares to like the dive capability? Because I know like if you're not familiar with this, listening, the development of the dive program, the sailors just, oh my God, it was brutal. Like no one knew about getting an AGE, an arterial gas embolism, or getting the bends, or nitrogen narcosis, and all these different things about like the dive table and the effects of being on compressed gas at depth and breathing, and the dive table that people basically like your depth and time when you go scuba diving or any type of diving. There's like a chart. So has how long you can be at a certain depth for a certain time, and then you have to do decompression stops on the way up if you pass those times. But all that stuff was figured out by throwing Navy dudes down to the bottom of the ocean and then bringing them back up and then studying the effects that it had on the body. And a lot of dudes died, and a lot of dudes lived a life, of
pretty
agony from just their body getting destroyed. Was the air side of the house as harsh on the body?
Because they took a lot of that stuff from like a lot of it was in the 60s when they did a lot of test pilot training, on how like the pilot is going to perform at these extreme altitudes. So a lot of that, for the free fall, the skydiving military free fall aspect of it for high altitude, is they took a lot of that aviation physiology from pilots, standing on the shoulders of giants, basically, like guys like Joe Kittinger, who just recently passed away, who, set the world record for his skydive in like 1967 or 68, I think, from a balloon at like 115 or 120,000 feet. I mean, and the record stood for decades, for 30, 40 plus years. But that was a lot of it where they took a lot of that aviation physiology from pilots over to, okay, now we're going to expose these guys outside, out of a pressurized cabin, so they would test, high speed ejections from 80,000 feet. And what's that going to do? Can the human body withstand that? And so that's a lot of, all those studies is where a lot of it takes precedence. So even military freefall physiology, it falls under Air Force jurisdiction, sort of guidelines and protocols, because that's where all the manuals and all the technical expertise lie at. So
my wife was asking me the other day, and I had an answer for you, but I'm interested in hearing your answer. It was a debate going on in the comments section on a post, because there was some guy, I guess, who went onto a commercial airliner, and he didn't check his parachute. He brought it with him as like a carry-on. and in the comment section, it just broke out that like, oh yeah, it's better to have it on the plane than to check it because, if anything happens, you can always just jump out. And she's like, is that possible? And, I was like, well, it's a little bit more complicated than that because a jet's flying at, 450 to 600 miles an hour and you're at like 40,000 feet. But I had my answer for her, and I'm sure yours is probably going to be similar, but you're much more of a subject matter expert on it. So just out of curiosity, what's your take on someone being able to jump out of a commercial airliner, which again, the doors are on the sides of those things, and be able to parachute if you just had a parachute, on the plane?
If you were to say, excuse me, can you mind opening the door?
Yeah.
That's probably not going to happen.
Yeah.
Now, if the plane splits in half, good luck putting that parachute on.
Yeah.
And then getting out. So first off, nobody's going to open up that door for you. And if they did, like you said, that indicated, the indicated airspeed, the airspeed on those aircraft, it's going to be astronomical. You get knocked out if you exit that plane. You're going so fast, even though the air molecules are so far apart, you're going to get drilled.
Yeah, it's going to be like running into a wall, right?
Getting catapulted into a wall.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And then if you're in a precarious situation where, the plane's in half, good luck putting it on and then trying to get out while now the plane is free falling to the ground. So I can't see any scenario that you'd be successful at it.
Be even close to being able to...
Now, if you're on a commercial aircraft, I don't see that happening.
Now,
without the intention of actually jumping out, you're just going on for a ride. No.
What would be the speed that, if let's say you, all right, so the thing with a commercial airliner is versus like a military plane, is the military planes are usually for cargo, which it just happens to be that they have a back ramp that we can jump off of, which
Correct.
Makes it really nice.
Yep.
And you're in the plane's turbulence and you're going out of the back. You're not making a 90-degree turn out of a door, right? Getting that crosswind hitting the body. What's the max speed, or unless if it's classified or whatever, but like what's the max speed the plane can be going that you could jump out of the back?
So I wouldn't know what the max speed is. Like it's funny you asked me because I was just asked this like a few weeks ago from
Really?
like someone doing some study stuff. I said, we've never, if they have, it wouldn't be disclosed to me. Like, let's see if this human cadaver stays in one piece if we throw him out of the plane doing, oh my God, fast. But in my own experience, jumping at extremely high altitude, the plane itself made sure that it had bare minimum fuel. And the idea behind that was that so that we could go as slow as possible and it wouldn't compromise, obviously, the integrity of flight at these altitudes. And so it was still pretty fucking fast, though.
Yeah.
So when I got out, I put my, it's basically jump off in a poise configuration facing the front of the aircraft, off the back of the aircraft. I put my arms behind me because I didn't know if I was going to dislocate my shoulder. Then if I did, then that would basically restrict my ability to deploy my main parachute. But it was fine. It wasn't that bad, but it was really fast. But the more important thing was it was really cold because that was a 58-minute parachute ride from that altitude.
Oh, wow. Really?
Oh, yeah.
Man. Yeah, that was going to be the next thing I was going to mention. So I know people watch the movies and all that stuff and they see the guys putting on the face masks and they're getting on oxygen or on air. And explain to them why they're doing that. Because that was the other question. And I was explaining to my wife that, the air is thinner and it's cold.
Yeah.
And all
Well,
that.
I mean, it's like, when guys climb, like the climbing teams, and I'm not not even an avid climber, living here in Florida, but guys climb up to Everest, which is just a tad below 30,000 feet. There's an acclimation process that goes through that, and I've got a couple friends that have done it, and they'll go to base camp, go up to camp 1 and then back to base camp and then camp 1, camp 2, back down to base camp. Basically, this is acclimation process, right? Well, you don't have that in aviation. If for skydiving, it's like go up to altitude and exit. So what you'll do is you'll do a saturation pre-breathe and you'll saturate your blood with 100% oxygen. And that amount of time depends on how high you're going. So there are these charts that basically real similar to dive tables that the Air Force developed from testing in chamber hyperbaric in high altitude, basically chamber simulators to see what the oxygen levels, the minimum oxygen levels needed to basically be able to sustain life at these altitudes. So if you were to lose your mask, how much time you have, a little bit more time before you actually go hypoxic, pass out, and then go into cardiac arrest. So it all varies. If you're going in excess of 18 or 20,000 feet, you're going to need supplemental oxygen. If you go in excess of 25,000 feet, you'll need supplemental oxygen and a pre-breathe of about 30 minutes. As you go higher and higher, the pre-breathe lasts a little bit longer. You have to breathe 100% O2 for a little bit longer. But ultimately what that does is that just delays your hypoxia symptoms. You'll still get them, and they'll still come if you don't have a mask on at those altitudes without any acclimation. You're gonna find yourself in about 18 to 20 seconds passed out, and about a minute and a half into cardiac arrest.
And that's longer than it takes you to get down.
Longer than it takes you to get down if you're doing a high altitude, high opening.
Yeah. Bad ratio.
Yeah.
So Anna, there's your answer. So tell us about, while we're on the topic of parachuting, tell us about this this adventure you just partaked in, where you were trying to do, well, not trying, you did 7 jumps in 7 continents in 7 days.
Yeah. So my buddy Mike, who did a 2006 and 2008 deployment to Iraq, gave me a call, and we kind of stayed in touch here and there, but he gave me a call in July of 2021. And he said, hey, I've got this idea, starting this company, and we want to try to raise money for some nonprofit. We'll pick it later to do 7 skydives on 7 continents in 7 days. I was like, you're biting off a lot. That was my first thing. It's like, okay, well, I know some people in the industry that have done some of this, have been all over, have been to all 7 continents. In fact, my good friend Tom had previously held the record that was for all 7 continents. It was like 6 months and 3 weeks. It's just logistically, it's this huge enigma that you're trying to basically piece together. And as you know, with our background, we do have some pretty good planning, and resources, and we can tap into logistics and ready to put things into place to work in our favor. So we started planning and started putting it together. And then
what part of the logistics makes it so challenging?
We were flying commercial.
Okay.
So like right there, commercial airlines, and then touching base with all the locations in advance, if you jump in the United States, traditionally you've got to have a United States Parachute Association certification, a license. So in some other countries, they honor that, but some other ones don't. And so waivers, release of liability, things like that, if you're going to come through and do these jumps. And we've got such a short window of time where, I was contacting a lot of the locations saying, can you pick us up from the airport and then take us to the drop zone? Feed us, give us a lift to altitude, and then take us back to the airport, and I'll pay you with a credit card. Give me a price quote. And they're like, okay, here you go. And so it was just sort of lining all that up with waiting to see what contingency was going to come at us throughout the entire process. What
was the response from the people you were talking to about that?
There was only one that was like, yeah, whatever. But everybody was all about it.
Pretty excited about it.
They were really excited about it. They didn't, we had, the guys on the team had some good reach, some good, social media reach, all prior military guys. And it was good for business for them. And they were getting paid. It's not like we were asking for anything for free. We paid our way, and we ended up, executing it January. This time last year, we just celebrated New Year's in Chile and down in Punta Arenas. And then we flew down to Antarctica. We were down there for a week, and we chose Antarctica first because we knew it was like the weirdest weather, the most unpredictable weather. And so when you go to Antarctica, at least with Antarctica Logistics and Expedition, the company that runs one of the camps down there at Union Glacier, you go down there for pretty much like 6 or 7 days. So we wanted to pick that one first because we had the flexibility. We could jump this day or this day or this day or whatever it was and then start our clock. Fortunately, we had good weather. We jumped the second day we were there just because you get 2 jumps with the package. So we jumped, got everybody kind of, all right, we jumped over Antarctica, shake it out a little bit. And then we just kind of hung out, did some expedition stuff, like, some hikes and stuff like that throughout the continent down there. The last day that the plane was coming in to pick us up, we had good weather, and the entire company and the entire team down there was like, here you go, here's your plane. And so we did a skydive we were on the I think it's a 737 or 757 that basically took off about an hour and a half later. So our clock had started and we were on our way. So it was 160 hours is what we were trying to get it done in, and we were well on our way.
That's wild.
Yeah. Then we went back to Chile, jumped in Santiago, Chile, and got some sleep. Went to Florida, jumped outside Clewiston, down in South Florida, and then went to Barcelona, jumped out there, and then went down to Cairo, jumped over the pyramids, went to UAE, and then finished it off in Perth. So,
which was the coolest jump?
I mean, the pyramids were pretty remarkable, to see the pyramids and like the sun like rising and seeing the shadow cast from the pyramids. It just didn't look real. I mean, you could see pictures after picture, but actually see, right over it and then fly a parachute, sort of buzz the top of it,
That's cool.
But I think Antarctica, because it's so few people have ever even been there, let alone.
Was that your first time to Antarctica?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I've never been there. I got to ask because I've heard all sorts of stuff online. So from the plane at altitude over Antarctica, I've heard that it's an ice wall to another whole section of the world that no one has access to, and then the other one I heard is a giant hole, and that the world is hollow and you can see into it, and there's like dinosaurs and shit in there. Did you see any of that?
All of it's true. And then the Predator, Alien versus Predator. No, none of that's true. None of that I saw. Anyways,
shit.
There's Drake's Ice Fall that kind of looks like a wall, not quite like Game of Thrones, but it's pretty cool. I mean, it's sort of like this frozen waterfall that is it'll move. It moves throughout the year, because it's bizarre looking. But
that's wild.
But it's nothing like that.
Was it cool, or was it kind of like, huh?
I thought it was absolutely cool because there was no Starlink, there was no internet down there. You're completely cut off. Food was great. People were really interesting. We met some really cool people that were like doing treks to the South Pole, cross country skiing. I thought it was really cool. They just had their last month. They had their marathon. They do a marathon every year.
Really?
Yeah. They just did that.
So there's starting to become some activity down there.
Well, I mean, the company that Antarctica Logistics and Expedition, they're based out of Salt Lake City. That's like where their headquarters at. And their owners, Mike and Tim McDowell are Australian. They live in Australia. They have a couple other owners that are like from, I think, Switzerland. And this company's been running strong for like 27, 28 years.
Oh, wow.
And they've been going down there. It's a research place, but it's also an expedition. You can go down there if you want to climb Mount Vinson, the highest peak in Antarctica. So big avid climbers that try to do the 7 peaks on 7 continents. That's where they go. That's Mount Vinson. Yeah.
That's pretty wild.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a lot of traveling to do.
Yeah, I think somebody did the math. It was like 46,000 miles and that we covered, and we did it in 6 days and 6 hours. So I guess like we looked at it where even if we got stuck or if we missed a window or if our clock had to start earlier because of weather or something like that, we'd be like, hey, even if we do it in 10 days, it's still kind of a remarkable thing, right? But the fact that, we did have a contingency when we were in Florida, on, I think it was January 11th. It was the first time since 9/11 that the FAA had shut down all commercial aircraft. It was like the NOTAM system had gone out, and what it was is basically it was overloaded, and so it shut down. So like our flight from Miami to Barcelona got canceled after we had landed in Miami from Chile, and we're driving over to the Clewiston to the drop zone to jump down there, and we're like, what are we gonna do? This is bad, right? And so with our resources is why one of the reasons why we chose the team we did. They started basically making calls. I had called someone that we had connected with in Antarctica because Antarctica is really interesting. You'll get like interesting people there, like kind of like dirtbag climbers or skiers or whatever, and then like the billionaire rock climber or mountain. Yeah. It's like, the place is so cool. So we were calling friends and then we got some resources, and then we ended up chartering a private. It was the only time we didn't fly commercials. We chartered a private G5 to go from Miami to Barcelona. And so we were able to get through that because the NOTAM system opened up, but our initial flights were delayed from Miami to Barcelona.
If one flight gets messed up, the whole timeline's screwed.
We only had 5 hours in Barcelona. That was our window. And so it was going to push us to where we'd miss our flight to Cairo, and then the rest of the leapfrog effect would have been compromised. So
did any of your jumps wind up being at night?
No. The only one that was like kind of difficult was Barcelona because the clouds layer was at around 2,000 feet. It was a couple 100 feet thick, and we had like 3 or 4 guys miss the drop zone, but they were the drop zone support, I don't everywhere, but the drop zone support there was really good. And they picked him up. We got packed up.
Like they landed out in town or just landed on the airport?
Well, in Barcelona, it's like an hour outside of the city. So it's like farmland and, open fields because they couldn't see. And so like we had taken the guys through some GPS training under canopy. And some of the guys didn't bring their GPSs. So I always do. So I've got, Jim is my tandem passenger. And I'm like, hey, Jim, do you know where the drop zone is? He's like, is it down? Because he's a witty one. I go, well, look, it's about a quarter mile right over that way, so just to be able to navigate that way. But that was probably the most intricate jump because the jumps weren't really hard. It was hard because we were also fatigued. And so but this was the kind of crew we wanted because, Ranger, Scout Sniper, a couple prior team guys, JTF2 guy, everyone is used to operating in the red and being tired and doing stuff when you're, complaining, your body hates you. Like these were the guys for it, for sure.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that must have been uncomfortable. I know, flying from Florida to Europe or to South America down to like southern Brazil or whatever, and you're on the plane for like 9 hours or 12 hours, you're just like your legs and back and neck and everything just hurts.
Yeah, everything was coach class except the G5 obviously, but everything was economy class.
Oh, that sucks.
But the overall thing was like it was really good. We were raising money for Folds of Honor, which is a nonprofit that does education benefits for deceased service members and first responders as well as disabled veterans. Education benefits for their dependents, their kids, spouses that are sort of left behind. And so that was where we focused our attention to it. That was that nonprofit because we had this eclectic group that we didn't want to go to one foundation that was specifically set for, say, the Special Forces community or the Navy SEAL or whatever it was. We wanted this big diverse group, so it covered down on that. And we got a lot of support from Folds of Honor on it. So I'm still supporting Folds on some of their events, and we're going to be, I think sometime in the spring is sort of launching this piece where if you want to go down to Antarctica to go do a tandem skydive with me, you can buy an auction seat through Folds. They'll start announcing it at some of their events, and then you'll go down to Antarctica for a week and do a tandem skydive with me next year.
That's cool.
Yeah. So we'll see if, how that goes.
That's cool.
Yeah. But yeah, the cool thing about that was, it was something, there's always things that you experience that you don't expect. The unbelievable amount of support from everyone that was involved in it, not on the team, but just at every location, Antarctica, Chile. I mean, all the locations, people were coming out of the woodwork to support it. And it was like, it was a really cool time to experience it where lately maybe your faith in humanity is kind of gone, stuff like that. It was restored. I mean, it's like the beauty behind people's compassion. So that was a really, really neat experience. And then, we had a small little film crew with us. So I think the documentary starts coming out in February, March, as far as like private screening, and wherever it gets picked up will then get released. So yeah.
Cool. So it's going to be on video?
Yeah. So it'll be, I think, when I talked to Dan Myrick, who's like the director of the whole thing, I think it was like an hour and 58-minute kind of documentary, and they were going through its editing last
Very cool.
month. So yeah,
that's going to be awesome. I bet they got some really pretty shots.
Yeah, and when I talked to him and he said it's like a full feature, I'm like, man, it's just skydiving. It kind of gets a little boring. But what he did was he captured our story.
Yeah, that's the interesting part.
Yeah, so the idea was to basically use it as a platform so we could tell the story about individuals that we honored at each of the locations, honoring the fallen. That it was basically just that. And so they got into, like kind of our history and us a little bit as individuals to then, tell the story of our fallen brothers and sisters.
That's cool. Cool. I wish I had done that. In 2007, I did a cross country bicycle ride and we rode over 3,000 miles, and there was so many amazing sights. And like you're saying, like when you do something like that, it's really interesting to see who steps up out of the woodwork and just starts, like, some of the most kind people and generous people. We were positioned to camp every night. Like we had the saddlebags and the tents and all that stuff, and we were like, we're gonna camp every night. And we rode it in 63 days.
Wow.
We're not like we weren't avid cyclists or anything like that, so it was just like, we're just gonna chip away. We're just gonna work our way across country. Yeah. We took 11 days off for fundraising.
Nice.
But of the 63 days, 46 were in hotels or people letting us stay in their home
Wow.
or,
That's pretty cool.
people letting us stay in their shops or
Yeah.
whatever, just so we didn't have to be in the rain. And the majority of the other nights where we actually camped is just because where we stopped, we're in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But like hotels or people and all these people just, they just heard that we're trying to do something good and we're taking on this big challenge, and we're going to use it to help families of the veteran community. And it was amazing to see people step up and support it.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, like, it's a very Forrest Gump kind of thing, right? And so a buddy of mine, Rob Wallace, who he's a local here in DeLand, he's, I think on his second day, I think he was just finished his second day, he's paddling around the state of Florida off the coast to raise money for Debbie Lee's foundation, America's Mighty Warriors. And so, like, Rob is like 72, 73 years old. And his kids are all, his two kids are prior military. And so they're not social media stuff. So he doesn't have a big following. So that's some of the stuff that's been like kind of pushed is to try to get, he's got a law enforcement background. So he's getting a lot of like lifeguard support and sheriff's and police department support, but he's out there in this 19-foot paddle ski, just paddling away, chipping away at going, so he'll stop, come in, take a day or two off, depending on weather, and then go right back to where he started, and then just on his way down to the Keys, and then eventually finish at the Alabama-Florida state line.
That's awesome. That's
just to raise money for, America's Mighty Warrior does a lot of hyperbaric treatment for TBI treatment, stuff like that. So, and Debbie Lee is the mother of Mark Lee, who was my teammate that was killed on August 2nd, 2006 in Iraq. So, yeah.
How important do you think it is for men to still have some kind of adventure in their life?
Well, I think it varies. I think it's incredibly important. Thankfully, my wife has permitted me to continue to have these types of adventures. Granted, I've tied it into what I do for a living, so that helps, So, but I think it's when I retired and we moved out here, and it was important to get back here is what she wanted, and so I supported that. It was a fresh start, but then I quickly realized that I don't have my community with me anymore. Now, granted, I was doing instructor trips and things like that, and so I still had a little bit of it, but I lost value, at least in myself. And so I kind of struggle with who am I, why am I here, but it was tough for me to really get back down to my primal instincts, which as a man is to protect and provide. And I felt like that's what I was doing with my, retirement and the work that I was doing, then yeah, that's fine. But I still was 39, 40 years old, still like, I just did 20 years and it's gone, poof, gone. It's like when you go to check out of the command, they're like, hey, thank you for your service, clean out your cage. That's it. You still have friends, but it's just not like it was before. Mm-hmm. And so that was really struggling. That was a struggling time for me, and then, dealing with some of the sort of guilt and survivor's guilt that I had from, Mark's passing back in 2006, finally started to catch up, because now I don't have an identity anymore. And, when I first met my wife in 2005, and this is, in hindsight, which is, it's looking at things in retrospect, I can always look at things clearer, is that she solved everything for me. She was this shining light, and like any problem I had, it would just being with her helped. And then when I retired, she wasn't helping. Granted, we had 2 kids, right? We had a new life that we were starting, but I was still struggling with my identity. So that built up some resentment toward her and resentment toward myself. And so I was sort of struggling with like some self-loathing. Thankfully, I never crawled into a bottle to solve it. I just beat myself up. And then we're starting to get established. We buy and build our first home together. And then in November 2017, she asked me, just checking in, how are things going? And I told her I was leaving her. And then we split up about a month and a half after that. I stayed in the area, still kept working. We did a really good co-parenting, but I put that woman through hell because I really surprised her with that. And definitely one of my big regrets is putting her through that, as well as all the deployments and all the shit that she dealt with.
What was your reasoning for?
I had to go find myself. It wasn't being a husband, and it wasn't being a dad. It wasn't what I wasn't ready for it. To have everything else shut off, and then this, to be on, I wasn't ready for that switch. I was ready for all the other stuff in combat and being torn between two communities and things like that. That was no problem. This was really hard for me because I had no place to go. I had no place to wander. I had no place to really define myself. And so May of 2019, I had a buddy that was going through some really good buddy. He was going through some stuff himself, and he wanted to go on this retreat, and he wanted me to go with him. And so we went, and then it was tough. I was able to look at my life, not just here in front of me, but from birth as a childhood, now, and then projections of a possible future. I was finally able to actually really look 5, 10, 15 years out. And it was more of an emotional thing than really like logistically like I normally do. Very calculated, and what does everything look like? So I slowly but surely started to kind of find my way back home and kind of get like, this is really who I'm supposed to be. This is who I am. And then in December of 2019, for Christmas, I bought my wife, because we never got divorced. We just split up. I bought her a new car. And then I asked her on a date. And about 3 months later, we got back together. And I mean, yeah, not a day goes by that I don't look at her, and I'm grateful for that, for sure.
That's awesome. She stayed by you.
Oh, yeah, I didn't deserve it,
So when you said you were going to find yourself and then you have that experience, what is it that you saw? What dots did you connect in that experience? That
I don't have, if it all ends right now, my legacy is shit. And it's like, I did all this, and it's, I'm sure somebody will read something really nice at my funeral, but I missed out on the best part of my life, and that's being a dad. And that's her enabling me to be a dad to these two great kids and being around. My parents divorced, and saw how that ended up for us, as 3 boys. And it just, it went back to my primal instincts, is to protect and provide. And that wasn't just for myself. And that's where my mind was at, was like, let me just take care of myself and let me get better. I didn't know when I left that I would be asking to come back. The fact that she really had her doors open, for it, and let me back in was pretty remarkable.
Did you guys talk during that time?
Yeah, it was co-parenting stuff, logistics with the kids, and there was a couple conversations that happened, about some possibility, but nothing until really that December. I surprised her, big time. So it was, she, when I surprised her with that, she really wanted to sit down. She's like, okay, these are my expectations. So she laid it out, and so
that's interesting. That's cool. You guys were able to work it out. I know there's a lot of, like, I don't know what the exact ratio is, but they would throw this around when we were at the team that it was like the teams had like an 85% divorce rate.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I don't know if that was technically the exact number or what, but I know there was a lot of dudes there who were awesome warfighters. And there was a lot of things. This kind of was going back in the very beginning of the conversation when I was saying, like, you have that full spectrum warrior mentality or that lifestyle. And even when you win at something, if you look at someone like freaking Tiger Woods, Tiger Woods, the number one golfer in the world, broke all these barriers. He was the first dude who wasn't, he's half white, but like the first person of color to come into the golf and take it over and all this kind of stuff. And the thing is, everyone loves Tiger Woods. And then the thing that takes him out is not golf. The thing that takes him out is him committing adultery with like hundreds of women. You know what I mean? And it seems that like guys will be professional athletes or be super successful and something takes them out, and it usually doesn't have to do with the actual job or their skill set, because that's where they put their time and attention and they excel in that area. But the other parts that they neglect are the ones that come back and bite them in the ass later on.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's just interesting to look at that, because in the SEAL teams, at least my experience when I was there, I had one dude who would open up the Bible and read. This one dude, and everyone just kind of looked at him like he was a little bit older. He was like really mature, and which is weird because, you know, he didn't drink, you know, he didn't curse. And, you know, the thing he had going for him, like with the guys, is, you know, he was big, like he was like in the bodybuilding, you know what I mean? So he looked big and strong. Well, he was strong, but like, you know, he had the look and everything like that. But, he would just sit down every night and he'd read, and everyone's like, no one gave him shit for it, but everyone's like, huh, he does this weird stuff every night. He reads this book. You know what I mean? Like, and everyone goes back to doing all their dumb stuff.
Yeah.
You know, but it's funny because of all the dudes at the team that I should have been looking to for guidance, you know, and replicating, you know, lifestyle choices. You know, this one dude was sitting there every day, and it's one of the guys that I really didn't tap into and ask for advice and all that stuff. And
well, it's not culturally popular.
It wasn't.
Yeah.
It wasn't. And
Yeah.
I know every platoon and every team is different, and through the course of time, you know, the atmosphere changes as the guys change, as world experiences change and all that kind of stuff. But it's just interesting of what is edified and what is replicated, and it's a hard pill to swallow, like you're talking about when you leave, you know, because like I've explained it to people before, where it's like the military, or especially the SOCOM community or the teams, it's like it's a really fast moving train, and when you step off, the thing doesn't even slow down. Here you thought you were so important and you were so intricate, and you know, everyone like, oh man, I gotta be there because the team needs me, and then you get off the train and that thing just cruises right down the track, and you're just standing there. I'm like, I thought you guys needed me, and they're like, nope, we just needed a body. We're gonna backfill that with someone tomorrow.
Yeah,
you know,
sled dogs.
Yeah, and it's
just,
like
boom, replaced.
And then you're just standing there in the distance watching the train go, and then before you know it, it's like you were never even on the train to begin with, and then you're just standing there with your character. Yep. And it's like what you're saying. Who am I?
Why am I here?
And what were some of the defining things when you go, well, who am I? What am I? Why am I here? What are some of those defining thoughts or characteristics or whatever that you came to the conclusion with when you had that reflection time?
That I found a way for my service to continue. And it was, you know, I'm not in the fight anymore, not wearing body armor, not deploying anymore. So what I'm going to do for a living is to be able to contribute and still serve those who serve. And, you know, whether that's, you know, putting my mind and my body through its paces, as, you know, I'm 46 and I've got to hold on to it as much as I can, is try to create, train, and equip guys with the best, the highest caliber equipment and training that I can provide. So that way it makes their job more effective, safer, so they can, for example, go rescue an American hostage at some point. You know, so that's my contributions on a very small level, that gives me identity and purpose outside of my household. You know, and that's appreciated and valued by my wife and by the kids. You know, they understand that, and it's very simple, because while what I'm doing, I'm not on active duty anymore, I'm still actively doing my duty to the community.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think on that, like I had to come to those same kind of conversations. Like I was just watching that train go, and for mine, I didn't retire at 20. Yeah. And mine, one day it just got cut short. And when I threw the blood clot 3.5 months prior to me finding out what it was. Yeah. But then next thing you know, they're like, nah, you can't stay in the teams. You can't pass your jump and dive physical. That clot, we can't fix it, and it could break. And you could have an aneurysm. So we can't take the risk of you jeopardizing the mission because of you having an aneurysm in the middle of an operation. And when I got out, it was like what same kind of thing. Like, what am I supposed to do? What's my purpose and all
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
And that was one of the things that,
Yeah. Cause you were all in and
yeah,
now you're all out.
yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the things that, with that program, Operation Restored Warrior, one of the things that I kind of took away from that program was I'm not in that physical fight anymore, but the spiritual war is raging.
Mm-hmm.
And it was one of those things where I started it shifted, like we were saying, the balance between the psychology and the faith and that spiritual warfare. It was like all of a sudden I was seeing everything that was happening in the form of like all these people who are trying to oppress us, and they're lying in the news, and they're doing this, and the things that are happening to the children right now, and all this kind of stuff that's going on. Like that's a war. Like we're seeing it physically, come to the surface through these people's decisions and actions.
Yeah.
But that's like a war that's raging in the background, between good and evil, and there's this spiritual war going on. And for me, like that's what I started to see. And it was like, the fight's not over. It's just changed battlefields. Mm-hmm. The shape of it just looks different.
Right.
You know what I mean? And for me, that was one of those things that helped me kind of come to terms with, the work's not done.
No, I mean, that's maturity though, because like this war's been going on since the beginning of time, so to speak, right? It's just like you said, it's a different battlefield. The atmospherics are they look different, but overall the root of it has the same foundation. And that's just maturity, that we're able to look at it with a different set of eyes, a more experienced and seasoned set of eyes now, and able to interpret it much better than we ever have when we were younger, because we were just like, mission, A, B, and C, got it. It's complicated. Okay, got it. But now it's like, okay, I don't have to I'm not worrying about being on the breach team. I'm not, these different things. Now I'm looking at bigger picture. You have a family now, you have a kid, so it's like, okay, things start to look a little bit differently now. Our actions carry a little, like, let's say they carry more, but they just carry differently, than they ever did before. So.
Yeah, that's cool. Any closing thoughts you have?
I think that, this past year, obviously, today's January 1st and of the new year. I think this past year has been hugely eye-opening for me. I think that I definitely struggled post expedition. Like physical recovery was eye-opening. It took me about 3 weeks to actually fully recover back to sleep and back in the gym and nutrition and things like that. And I did have some help from my strength and conditioning coach and the people at Whoop. But I was in a mental slump for a good couple of months, after it, just sort of like, I had this, I was literally back on a platoon is what it felt like. We all had the same goal. We were going hard and it was really difficult and we didn't know what was going to happen. And then it was taken away from us again. It's like, the hell do we do this for?
Yeah.
But, I started writing and, just journaling. And I definitely have been pushing that as far as like to some of my friends or people that are kind of, struggling, but, nobody's going to read it. Nobody has to read it, or you can share it. It doesn't matter. Just write. It can be completely free association writing. It can be dark. It can be demented and twisted, but just write. It's a way to get out of your own head and put it, on paper, or just write on your phone or whatever it is. Just write, just journal, just something. It doesn't have to be every day, but just know that that's something that you're attaching yourself to. And that's really been pretty cathartic for me. I'll sometimes reread it and be like, oof, man, that's pretty dark. But, to be in the dark is really good because I'm able to recognize when things are really good.
Yeah.
So there's a really good contrast, because I never want to lose my edge, because I'm still in this primal caveman, protect and provide, no matter whatever happens, in this country and down the road, is to still have that. And it's really important to me. And I think that the mental health, struggles that specifically like us veterans go through when we get out and we kind of lose our role, or lose our role that we've had for so many years, or that we were so invested in is magically gone, is to redefine that. And I think writing and some self-reflection and actually like, okay, now I'm going to get into the core of who I am. I'm going to face some of these demons that I had because I was, raised by, the way I was raised as a child, and kind of like facing those things. That's what any clinical psychologist is going to take you through. Their therapist is going to take you through. Where did it all begin?
Mm-hmm.
For us grown men, it's our relationship with our mom. That's where a lot of it stems from, especially for those of us that are 1980s kids. Dad was at work, mom was at home, and it was just, it was tough. And so facing these certain realities that you can't do anything about, but actually just growing, healing on your own and getting through it and finding a purpose. And I think, keeping the mind busy, the gym is a great place for me. You put 50% in, you're going to get 50% out. Do things with the kids, and I'm not trying to self-medicate other than through good, productive, kind of healing measures that contributes to the family and the overall society best I can.
That's awesome.
So,
do you find that the veteran community leans a little bit heavy on relying on medications to help fix the problems?
In my opinion, I don't think the veteran community does, like service members. I think that we don't want to be medicated. I think that some of the providers lean on that.
Yeah.
And I think that it's sort of, that's kind of where we're at. I think there are so many other means of treatment and of help. But fortunate for me, like I never went down that. Maybe it would have saved me in some capacity, but I'm glad because I'm kind of free of it. So I find myself very fortunate, with that, not crawling in a bottle or not being on anti-anxiety or antidepressants or anything like that. Very fortunate, but I think that the push is not from prior service members themselves. I think it's from the VA and the healthcare providers. That's where I think it's from, because there's a financial benefit. Clearly we're seeing that come out. There's a financial benefit to putting people on prescription medication. So
yeah, I dodged a bullet with that one. They when I had my surgery, they did that first rib resection to try to fix the clot. And dude, originally they were going to give me, if I wanted it, they were going to give me the pain medication for the surgery with 3 refills, which brought it out to me being on painkillers for 6 months. It was a nasty surgery, but like, dude, I didn't need 6 months of painkillers for it.
Yeah.
And I didn't take any of them. And the first couple of days, obviously I was on painkillers when I was in the hospital because they were administering them. Yeah. But like when I left and I had that first prescription, I didn't take any of them, and it was brutal for the first couple of days. But I know so many people who've gotten addicted to those freaking, opioid painkillers, and it's just like so hard to get off of. Yeah. And it's just scary, and they're I don't know. I see a lot of doctors and a lot of people really leaning heavy on that medication. And I think like what you're talking about, and I know for some people they need it,
so there's a place for it. I'm sure.
There's a place for it. Yeah. But I like what you're talking about with journaling and looking at different ways to find purpose. My grandfather, and this is like old school thinking, my grandfather used to be like, if you had a bad attitude one day, or if you were mad about something and you're like complaining, he's like, if you have time to complain, you're not working hard enough. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. He's like, if you have a bad attitude, you need to go help somebody. Yeah. He's like, stop thinking about yourself, go serve someone. Yeah. And then you don't have time to be, having a pity party. But that was that old school mentality of like the early.
Some of it can still work though.
But there's something to be said as far as, and I think that's where some of the power is, in doing things for nonprofits, serving your family, serving others. I think where it becomes dangerous is when you get so heavy into the serving others, like we were talking about earlier in the very beginning, that you never face your own stuff, and you hide behind the service to others just to have busy time. You know what I mean? So there's no time left at the end of the day for self-reflection or to meet any of that stuff head on and face it. But
well, it's a practice. That's what I call it. It's like, how did you get really good at fill in the blank at CQC. You had to do runs. You have to practice at it. I think that, nowadays we want this instant result, instant gratification. Like, okay, I no longer hate myself. How do I get to there tomorrow? Well, you're not. It takes practice. You have to refine your skills in order to practice liking yourself again and giving yourself some self-compassion. Because if you have self-compassion for yourself, then you can have an effective relationship with other people. So you have to constantly work at it. You brought up professional athletes. It's like the only reason those guys and girls are any good at it is because they are putting in hours of practice. They're putting themselves through hell in order to perform. So go ahead and put yourself through some hell in order to perform. It takes practice to be good at anything, even a good human being. It takes practice. You have to have good practices.
That is a great point. I think I'm not going to say anything after that. I think that's a good way. That's a good ending thought for people to leave with. So unless you have anything else you'd like to throw in, I think that's a really good spot to kind of wrap this up. And I appreciate you coming on and sharing some of this stuff and sharing some of your personal life. I know those are not always the easiest to just put out there publicly, but at the same time, that's some of the stuff that people need to hear, because that's the real things that are happening in people's lives behind the scenes.
Well, and the idea is when I talked about, doing that expedition, is if we overtly talk about Mark Lee, and who he was and what his mom is doing. If one person takes away from my life lesson and doesn't crawl into a bottle or doesn't pull the trigger, and it just puts it down and it's like, okay, I can practice at being better, then it was worth it to me. And
are you going to dive into that a little bit on that documentary?
Oh yeah. The documentary is I got into, who Mark was, what Mark meant to me, and then, what Debbie's doing. It's telling his story so people know who he was, and then the continued legacy that Debbie is doing, and then the little bits and pieces that I can continue to do with that, But yeah, we get into some tearing up on some of those interviews on that documentary. I'm not sure if they put it in, but I'm sure they probably kept some of it.
All right. So, well, if you ever want to come back and talk more on Mark.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, we'd love to hear it.
Cool.
Awesome.
Well, thanks, Rich.
All right, Nick, thank you for joining us. All right, thanks guys for tuning into the Full Spectrum Warriors podcast. This episode was brought to you by Grunt Style, the all-American Patriot apparel brand. Check them out. You can always use code RICH15 for 15% off your orders at gruntstyle.com. Also, if you haven't already, give us a follow, like and subscribe, leave a comment, share this with a friend, help us beat the algorithm, and help us spread the word and let others know about the podcast and the different things that we're doing over here at Full Spectrum Warrior. We really appreciate it. All right, guys, we'll see you here on the next one, coming soon.